Perfect. Thank you, in case there's a problem. Good.
Hi, Elizabeth. Hi, Faith.
Hi, Margaret. How are you?
Good.
Good.
Margaret. Good morning, Elizabeth.
Hey, Sandy.
So I am watching the participant count rise as people are logging on to the webinar. We will be starting in a couple of minutes.
Thank you.
Great.
In case you didn't notice, this is Gary. I'm on the call too.
Excellent. Gary, then maybe you, I pleased to hear that you're on the call. I was going to ask Chip to say a few things when we get to the human subjects slide. Would you rather?
I would. I'm fine with having Kip talk about that, and then
Okay.
we have other specific questions where my input is needed. I will, as usual, not be quiet.
Okay, wonderful. We'll look forward to you chiming in. Thank you. Right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. We are going to allow just another minute or two for others to sign on. We have over 200 people on the line right now, but we want to make sure that we don't have anyone miss anything. So if you could just hold on for one more minute and then we'll begin. Thank you. There we go. Okay, well, I think this might be a good time to start. So I welcome everyone to this virtual research town hall for UC San Diego. I'm Sandra Brown, the Vice Chancellor for Research here, and we have a number of distinguished leaders with us today to answer your questions and to help present some important information to you. So the structure that we thought we would use today would be to begin with a relatively brief presentation and then follow that by an extensive period of time for you to ask questions and for all of the experts on the call today to answer those questions, to address those issues. With that, I think we can begin. So in the next slide, as this is moving really smoothly, there we go. We're going to hear from Dr. Chip Schooley, who's been a key person in helping us from an epidemiological perspective understand the current situation here at UCSD, in San Diego, and actually globally as well. So with that, Chip, I'm going to ask you to share with those on the webinar today an update about our current situation.
Thanks very much, Sandy. I'll be relatively brief in this section because these are numbers that I think most people on the call are well aware of, and just kind of starting globally and boring down to San Diego. We're continuing to see a case count rise globally, but most of it these days is being driven by the US and Europe. The US now has nearly 30% of the cases, with a third of our cases in New York State. But we expect, as New York is now beginning to peak out, to see the disease shift to the Southeast and to the Midwest. California is now number 4 in the US, but we are such a large state that from the standpoint of cases per population, we're at relatively low in the overall spectrum. And we're fortunate to have a much flatter curve than many of the other states that waited until later in the epidemic arrival to institute social distancing. We've had a much flatter curve than most other states in the country and have been consistently in the bottom 10 in terms of rate of rise. San Diego also has been reasonably spared. We've unfortunately had 1,500 reported cases and undoubtedly many more unreported cases, and asymptomatic cases, and also, very sadly, 36 deaths. Our deaths, like most deaths, have been in people over the age of 60. 3/4 of the deaths, 27 of them, have been people 60 or older. At UC San Diego, our health system has done extremely well. We have a steady rate of steady inpatient census of about 13 to 20 a day for the last 3 weeks, without much change in overall trajectory, which makes it beginning to look like our peak is going to be more like a mesa than a mountain peak, benefiting from the earlier slowdown in terms of social interactions, and that we may be nearing the end of our peak at a time when we fortunately did not get into a situation where we were having to ration access to hospital beds, respirators, and ICU beds. So the bottom line from the epidemiologic perspective is that social distancing is working. What we've all been doing to great inconvenience and social cost has had a big impact on us in California particularly, and we need now to learn from what we've learned from this as we start thinking about how we can move back to a more productive stance. So let me turn this back over to Sandy for the next segment.
Chip, thank you so much. That's very useful. And I've never been so happy to have a mesa, be viewing a mesa rather than a peak than I am today. And I want to create just an opening here to thank all the researchers and staff who are on the phone, on the webinar, for their diligent work in maintaining the safety, not just for themselves, but for others. Good, thank you, Chip. There may be questions again about this, but we'll take them after we move through the rest of the material. Next, we have the opportunity to hear briefly from our Executive Vice Chancellor, Elizabeth Simmons. Elizabeth?
Thanks very much, Sandy. I appreciate everybody's being here today. I think it's really important that we continue to gather as a community to make sure that we are learning together, that we're getting our questions answered with accurate information, and then sharing that information with others in our groups so that people will know what's going on. And I wanted to just say I'm really proud every day as I see the news come out about all the outstanding research that we are still doing here on this campus, even in this time of crisis. That's a real testament to the intellectual vigor and curiosity on this campus. And finally, I appreciate everything that everybody here is doing to contribute to the social distancing, frustrating though that is. Thank you all so much. Sandy?
Thank you, Elizabeth. Appreciate you being here and being available should questions arise that relate to the academic side of the house. We also have the good fortune of having Margaret Leinen on the line. She's the Vice Chancellor, of course, for Marine Sciences and the Director of Scripps Institution of Oceanography. Margaret?
All. The main thing that I want to say is thank you. Thank you to, first, all the researchers. You have shown extraordinary patience in dealing with this crisis. And we all know how frustrated you are and how concerned you are. You're concerned about, in addition to yourselves and your families and friends, the labs that you work in and the people who work there. You're concerned about the students who are there. You're concerned about the research and whether you're going to be able to complete projects that are ongoing, and about the careers of everybody that's involved. And I want to assure you that those concerns are reflected in all of the conversations that are taking place at the chancellor's level, the EVC's level, Sandy's level, in ONR, and in the various divisions. We're desperately trying to respond to those challenges. Thanks as well to all who are involved in research administration for your amazing work in keeping everything moving. Grants being submitted, all of the work that makes it possible to do the research, and to Sandy and your whole team at ONR, at ORA, for helping to keep us informed and thinking beyond today. Thanks so much.
Well, glad to have you with us, Margaret. I know that there may be special questions that relate to some of the unique research that takes place at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and we're very glad that you'll be able to be here to answer a few of those questions. So let's move on. Let's take a moment and talk about research continuity. It's so important for us to remember what our guiding principle is here, which is really to maintain and protect the health of our community within our own individual labs, our community within our departments, our divisions, within our campus as a whole. And our community is all of its members, the students from undergrads to grads to postdocs, our junior to all the way up to our most senior faculty, researchers, and staff. So with this principle in mind of protecting the health of our community, we've modified all of our research to reduce the on-site activity, the presence of the staff. We've sought to reduce that to focus on only critical research activities, limiting our sites to 1, max 2 people a day, at any given time. To remain in compliance with the CDC guidelines about physical distancing and sanitation of the common spaces that we have. You'll see there's a little red star here, and that's to remind me to thank everyone on the webinar today for the plans that they've submitted to their departments and their research units. And also, if those plans change, which in the future at some point, as we start to ramp up again, they will, it'll be important for you to update them and to resubmit them so that the department chairs, the deans, our security on campus, and our facilities that will help in any kind of physical emergency situation know who to expect in your lab and how to keep them safe. So I want to thank you for that. That was a tremendous effort to have all the faculty engaged in that, and we're very, very appreciative. Next, just a couple of reminders about our on-site research. Remember, at this point, even though we're on a mesa, we're not at a peak. Personnel need to be kept to a minimum at the lab. And this is at any single time and also over time. So if you are sequencing people in the lab, be sure that the number of individuals there are minimized in compliance with our standards. All labs should have sanitizing kits available to them. And I encourage you to use them on the common spaces like doorknobs and light switches and counters, etc. The places where people touch regularly. And a final reminder that students, our undergraduate students and our graduate students are not essential research personnel, they're students first. and they should not be in the research facilities unless they are there with your explicit permission to complete their research. And these are only in critical situations. And we can come back to that topic if we need to. Okay. Next, I wanted to have an opportunity to hear from Kip Cantello, who directs the IRB program here at UCSD. So he can tell us a bit about the human subjects research and the clinical trials. There have been a few recent changes in IRB requirements. And so at this point, Kip, if you could share that with those almost 300 people on the webinar.
Thanks, Sandy. So I want to mention for everyone that I'm going to be talking both about what IRB guidance is for protecting the human subjects in your research, but then also talk a bit about what institutional requirements are, not IRB requirements, and how those affect your human subjects research as you reduce activity and follow the guidelines that Sandy's just been talking about. So the first point here is that we do have guidance on the IRB website that talks about the intersection of these risk mitigation strategies and what you should think about in your human subjects research to protect your subjects, and then how that intersects with IRB regulatory requirements. The main point here is that there is generally no immediate need to submit amendments to the IRB for review if you're making adjustments because of COVID-19. That's especially true if all you're doing is implementing temporary measures to reduce risks, such as switching to a remote visit or a remote questionnaire instead of an in-person visit, things like that. There are a few exceptions, and I'm not going to go into a great amount of detail, but these guidelines are available on our website, that you would want to submit an amendment to the IRB if you are making permanent changes to the research. I imagine right now things are just so up in the air that you don't want to decide whether it's permanent or not. That's fine. One thing that you should submit amendments for, though, is if you are adding COVID-related aims to your research. So that to add those aims is not a subject protection measure that would be excused from the need for amendment. So keep that in mind. Also, if you make changes that do increase the risks to subjects, if you end up having to skip dosing, for example, of a study drug, or skip important safety monitoring visits, then those are things that should be reported to the IRB in a more prompt fashion. Also, we've had a few cases of people who either travel here for research purposes or travel from San Diego to other locations and would now be seen at UCSD for follow-up visits. Anytime that there's sort of a sustained use of alternate locations to perform study procedures, that should also be disclosed to the IRB soon after you start doing that. Again, more details are available on our website. And then we do expect that tomorrow we'll be releasing more detailed guidance. I realize a number of people have been asking about this guidance on switching to remote informed consent, where you previously have been doing in-person informed consent procedures. So more guidance on that is coming. Just to briefly summarize the other requirements you see on the slide here, that this is more, again, about the institutional requirements to reduce in-person activity. What that means for clinical trials in particular is that for interventional trials where you're testing drugs and devices with a therapeutic intent in serious or life-threatening diseases, you can continue enrolling new subjects and continue with visits. For other interventional clinical trials, you can continue with existing subjects, but you are expected to reduce face-to-face activity as appropriate, again, without compromising safety or dosing or things like that. And then for other clinical research or for social and behavioral research, those can continue with current participants as long as you switch to remote or virtual procedures. And then you can enroll new subjects as long as you switch to remote procedures for them as well. And as I mentioned, we'll have more guidance about remote informed consent tomorrow.
Kip, thank you. That is just wonderful, the flexibility that our IRB has shown to allow investigators to make the accommodations that they need during this period of time. We so appreciate it.
Thank
And if there are questions, we'll hold those to the end. And I know we also have Gary Firestein on the webinar today, and he may be able to assist us in answering questions about human subjects research and clinical trials. Next, we're going to shift to the animal side of the house. We do a tremendous amount of animal research here at UC San Diego, and we have our lead veterinarian, Dr. Phil Richter. So Phil, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you very much, Sandy, and a virtual hello to everybody. I want everybody to know our animals are all safe and sound. All the animal housing locations that we have are remaining fully operational. We have our full team of husbandry and support personnel available, providing care and after hours emergency response as usual. The research laboratory personnel, as Vice Chancellor Brown just discussed, has been modified. We are down probably 95%. So 5% of normal traffic is probably the case going on right now. The vivariums and animal care facilities are designed, and the procedures are there to prevent on a standard basis viral and microbial contamination, or to prevent the contamination and cross-contamination. And these are continued to be observed as normal. However, we have increased the frequency of decontamination in a number of places and locations just to minimize the potential for personnel exposure to SARS-CoV-2 in these environments, which have a very large decrease in traffic. And then finally, I just want to say that we're actually discussing and evaluating locations in support of COVID-19 animal research projects presently. And that's
Thank
about
you,
it.
Phil. And again, thank you for the extra work that your team is doing to help maintain our animal colonies, to keep our animal research program in a place where we'll be able to come back and be more involved and engaged in on site in the not too distant future. Next, I'd like to highlight that we are supporting not just the research projects, but the research staff. The UC system has a policy on job protection for career staff that prevents layoffs for COVID-19 related reasons, and this runs through the end of June. It enables the research staff who can't work on site to still contribute to the research program by working remotely. And I know that our researchers, our PIs, and our leads have been very creative about new types of activities and work that individuals are assigned when they're working remotely. In addition, more recently, our HR system has developed a temporary work opportunity clearinghouse, and that's a resource for non-academic staff. For cases where you may have extra time for your staff, there may be other units that might need the kinds of skills and resources that your team has. I want to remind people also that if your contract or grant expires or is depleted of funding before this June 30th date, all of the standard procedures to close things out, including staff, apply. So that the current terms of the employment contract apply for those individuals if you are closing your project before June 30th. Also, we'll be talking in a few moments about supplemental funding from agencies that might be available for some portion of costs that are COVID-19 related. At a national level, it's very good to see that we have some of the same flexibility that we've seen with our IRB right here on campus. In particular, the Office of Management and Budget Guidance has encouraged federal agencies, most of whom have adopted this model of flexibility with regard to grants and cooperative agreements. So for example, although the timing of these varies a little, there are opportunities for late proposal submissions. We always encourage you to talk to your project officer if that's going to be the case. There are opportunities for no cost extensions and with no although prior approval requests need to be in place. So you need to talk with your program officer about that. It's important that for our standard reporting obligations, progress reports, financial reports, etc., some of these can be delayed as well, and the timing of that varies across the agency. It's important also to note the allowability of salaries and stipends and benefits as per our UC policies, even if individuals are working off-site and even if they're doing things other than what was originally articulated in their position description in the contract or grant. There are, in some cases, travel costs that can be reimbursed for the impact of COVID-19. And many agencies have supplemental funding opportunities. So you'll see on this slide the information about our Blink website that has all of this information available to you. And even though our staff is here and available, we know that not everybody can complete all of their requirements for managing grants administratively on time. So these flexibilities are very helpful for us. Okay. Next, I want to highlight that it isn't going to be important for every project to track to the extent that you can and document the expenses that are caused by or related to this pandemic. Now, why is that important? Because we may be able to, as a university, receive reimbursement from FEMA for some of those expenses if they fall within the eligible guidelines, and also potential reimbursement from your funding agencies for supplements to your project to accommodate the impact of this pandemic. So it's important that you track these on an ongoing basis. For example, NIH has guidelines that address the costs that are associated with donating research supplies, and I'm very proud of all the donations that occurred, PPE donations to our health services facilities. So grant recipients can rebudget those, the repurchase of supplies, as well as using unobligated balances and submit for administrative supplements as well. NIH provides additional funds to support supplies that are directly related and were directly charged to the project. So again, you'll find that information on our Blink website, but the most important message from this is simply to track the expenses and the challenges that you've had and the associated cost for your grants, so that you can, as an individual, and we can as a university, hopefully recover some of those expenses. I think it is important that we take a step back and think about what's happening federally, what we might be able to expect in the future for the COVID, based on the COVID-19 emergency legislation that's in place at a federal level. And we're fortunate to have our executive director for federal government research relations, Angela Phillips Diaz, online with us. And Angela, I'm going to ask you to say a few words about the situation and what we might be able to expect from federal funding.
Thank you, Sandy, and good afternoon, everyone from Washington, D.C. This graphic is meant to convey to you the activities that have occurred over the last 3 weeks, which is quite extraordinary in terms of the Congress taking action. And so you'll see references to 3 specific pieces of legislation that have been passed and enacted by the Congress. The first one being the coronavirus preparedness and response supplementary, which was the $3 billion plus allocated for vaccines, and that was what people call as phase 1. The second piece of legislation was more policy focused and is named the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. That was enacted on the 17th of March. And then most recently, that most of you have probably heard a lot about, is the CARES Act. And that was enacted on the 27th of March, which provides agencies funding, and it shows references to specific research funding for NIH, NSF, Department of Energy, and others. The package, what I was hoping to be able to have an update on what may be called the phase 3.5 or phase 4. The Congress met earlier today. The the Senate Republicans had proposed a $250 billion supplement to the CARES Act, specifically for small businesses. The Democrats proposed a $500 billion bill that, in addition to the small business additions, they were proposing $100 billion for hospitals, $150 billion for state and local governments, and then additional funding for expansion of food assistance. Regrettably, they could not reach a consensus today, and so they adjourned, and they are scheduled to come back again on Monday, and we'll speak to that. If we could go to the next slide, please. So in terms of areas of concern, the main message here is to convey we are actively engaged in raising all of these concerns, ranging from funding, as Sandy had mentioned, mindful of administrative burden, and most importantly, the timely disbursement of these funds. Examples of the activities that have just occurred over the last week. On Friday, Chancellor Khosla and CEO Mason met with 3 of our House members last Friday, and we provided a list of UC San Diego's priorities for the members of the House and Senate to advocate on behalf of UC San Diego for this next stimulus package. Yesterday, Sandy Brown and Vice Chancellor from UCLA, Wakimoto, and I had a call with Kelvin Drogemeyer, who is the Director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy at the White House, as well as Acting Director for NSF, and again highlighted the criticality of being able to support our students, our institution, and looking forward, recognizing not only the shutdown costs, but also the ramp up costs, if you will. And they were both the congressional members as well as Dr. Drogemeyer, very receptive, fully recognize and appreciate the challenges that we all are facing, and are strong advocates for us, both with the administration as well as with the Hill. And so I think with that, oh, the last thing I wanted to mention to people is it's really important as part of our advocacy that you share your stories with us. We are trying to raise the profile both locally in terms of media outlets, but also for me and Sandy and the Chancellor and others in the Washington area to be able to share both the positive impacts that you're having, but also the challenges. And so please feel free to reach out to us to share those and keep that part of this advocacy in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. You know, one of the things that really stands out to me is that in the midst of this crisis, our researchers continue to do things that have a profound impact for the public good. Whether that is through volunteer activities, gearing up new types of efforts here on campus, to create PPE or equipment that vital equipment that's needed in medical facilities. So people have really stepped up to the plate, and both our research has an important impact on the well-being of our community, and our researchers have an important impact on the community. So again, I will echo what EVC Simmons and Vice Chancellor Leinen said, that we're so appreciative of the efforts for researchers here on campus. So that's a lot of information. And what I want to point out is that we thought it would be helpful to have a central place where you can get all of that information. And so we've created this research portal on Blink that has 4 different components to it. It's kind of the go-to place to answer questions that you have. We have one section that focuses on investigators who have in the past or currently now, more recently, have research that's funded and that they're engaged in that relates to COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2. So there's a listing there. If you're involved in that and you don't see your name on there, please add it and please add the information so that we can have that an accurate, up-to-date line of investigators. It's helpful for individuals who want to collaborate. They might have strengths in one area, but for a proposal, they would need other kinds of investigators to be involved in those collaborative efforts. So we have an investigator listing there. Similarly, we have a listing of funded projects. So that are related to COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2. Again, I think we update that every Monday based on the information that we have in contracts and grants. This would include contracts and grants from the past and recent supplements that you've received. We do not, as of yet, put on there your proposals. And one of the things that we want to make sure is that we don't put any information on there that isn't available to the public in general, especially without your permission. But once a project is funded, it's going to be up. And again, it creates an opportunity for others to contact you if they're putting together multidisciplinary research projects. A third thing that we have is an ongoing listing that we update regularly of funding opportunities. These would be local to our campus, to the UC system, state of California, federal, public, private. These are again updated regularly and those could be sources for you for additional monies to help manage the challenges of COVID-19. And then finally, I'm really proud that we are referencing some of the networks that you've developed here on campus. These are generated by our own researchers from UC San Diego. One is Earth 2.0 Co-Respond. This is based as a program to support frontline clinicians and researchers, and to help bring multidisciplinary teams together. The idea is to get very rapid responses when you have a question, if you're writing a grant, or there's or you need information about a clinical aspect or research aspect. So this is a wonderful website for you to engage in, and they do a beautiful job of screening the questions, making sure they get to the right people so you can get a rapid answer. And for some of the stories I've heard, that people have like great answers to complicated questions within just a matter of hours. And want to thank the researchers and Linda Hill in particular for her leadership in helping to initiate this effort. A second one that I thought I'd highlight here, and there are a number of these, but this one is called SCREEN, San Diego COVID Research Enterprise Network. Again, it's a grassroots effort. It's multi-institutional, not just for UC San Diego, but many of our research partners on the Mesa. Salk, for example, and TSRI. San Diego State is a partner in this one, and the Sanford Burnham Previs Medical Discovery Institute, as well as the La Jolla Institute of Allergy and Immunology and Rady Children's Hospital. So it's a very engaged group of researchers. Also included are a number of biotech and tech collaborators, industry partners, who are coordinating and connecting researchers. So that's on a Slack line, and the reference is there. This is on our website too, so you don't have to remember all the details. Just go to the COVID-19 research website, and you can get connected that way. Additionally, there are a variety of clinical trials that have already been initiated here. And to connect to these, and as well as the important biospecimen repository that we have through the ACTRI, that connection information is available on the website. So the idea is it's a portal for you. If there's additional information that you'd like to have included, please contact us and let us know, because we want this to be a resource for all researchers on campus. Okay. Next, we wanted to move on to share with you very briefly about funding opportunities. I mentioned earlier that, and Angela articulated some of the monies that have already been dedicated to federal agencies in this arena. There are both public and private, however. So this slide simply highlights that it's not just NIH, it's not just NSF, but NASA and DOE and DOD all have relevant new opportunities, and this is available on the website. Also here we mentioned the Russell Sage Foundation that focuses more on the social sciences side. And for each of these, there is a brief description of what the opportunities are, what deadlines are, and the link to all the information about it. We have the added advantage here at UC San Diego of having our RAPIDS program. That's the Research Proposal Development Service. And so for large projects that you might be thinking of, ones that are more complicated, even ones that involve multiple campuses or institutions, this is a service that you can call on to help get those applications together and out in a timely fashion. It's not just at the federal level, but at the state level as well, that we have additional opportunities for funding. And I'm going to call on Miroslav Kristic, the Associate Vice Chancellor for Research here, to tell us about a couple of the most recent ones that come from the UC system. So Miroslav?
Hi, thank you all for joining us for the town hall today, and I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Sounds good. So if you're already registered as a, broadly speaking, COVID-19 or epidemiology or mathematical modeling or an AI expert interested in the subject, and there are about 190 to 200 of those on our website, you've already received these announcements. If not, I'd like to bring this to your attention. So there are two opportunities coming from the UC Office of the President. And I'm going to copy into the chat these two links. So the first opportunity is an investment of a total of $2 million that UCOP is making to give on a really quick time scale with only an administrative review, not an extensive panel review, grants up to the amount of $25K in this area. The submission was open on Monday. If you're interested in applying for those $25K, I urge you to be really quick because well in excess of 2 million in requests has already been received at UCOP. This is going to be administered on some sort of a rolling basis. In other words, somewhat first come, first serve, but not everybody will be getting it. It will be a reasonably careful selection, so there's still time, even though such a large response has resulted. The other opportunity is a modest allocation that the Vice Chancellors for Research have received, a total of $50,000 to distribute on campuses, and we have instituted a program for that selection on our campus where the grants will be $5,000 per grant, so a total of 10 grants, unless we're surprised by some matching opportunities by various unit leaders. And those, for that opportunity, you see the link on the shared screen. You cannot click on that, but you can click on the link that I copied into, that I pasted into the chat. And that link takes you to the submission side at our InfoReady site. The deadline is in about a week, but the proposals are only one page, so a week sounds like plenty of time given how little is asked of you in terms of submitting these requests. They will be evaluated competitively, and the areas in which these submissions should align with what happens to be the source of funding. The source of funding are the laboratory management fees for the 3 national labs of the Department of Energy. So these 6 areas that you see there are areas where the Department of Energy considers itself aligned with the needs for COVID-19. And those would be the modeling and analysis of pandemics, the related computational and AI techniques, the clinical and therapeutic interventions, and finally, the manufacturing and materials issues related to supply chains, which is where the DOE has a lot of strength and interest.
Excellent. Thank you, Miroslav. Thank you so much. That's very useful. These are 2 of the newest ones. I will mention with regard to the second, the seed funding opportunity. I've already heard from a number of deans, and they're interested in doing matching, either to extend the number of these little seed grants or extending the size of the seed grant. So look for an update. Hopefully we'll have an update by Monday of what that might be. Also, from within the UC system, we did send out an announcement recently about the MRPI programs, the multi-campus research programs that need to involve a researcher from at least 3 campuses and 1 lab. That's on our website. There's a UC opportunity for the Transportation Institute as well. That's on our website. So it's kind of hopefully the go-to place for up-to-date information. And we try to be sure that we're covering all of the areas that our campus has expertise in, ranging from the health sciences to SIO to all across general campus. So hopefully this information will be useful and easy to access for you. That's the main thing. Finally, I just want to mention that in regards to that, even though all of our team is working at a distance, we were working remotely. We're available to you. We're carrying on activities in the contract and grant office. In health sciences, HISPO is fully operational for contracts and grants, and SIO as well. You heard about our animal care program, and we mentioned the ACTRI as well. But other areas that you might not be thinking about, like the Office of Innovation and Commercialization, up and rolling, offering services not just to faculty, but to our students as well, including the ongoing certificate programs that we have for undergrads and graduate students in entrepreneurism. Our Office of Postdoctoral Scholars and Visiting Scholars is open and available for any questions that you have, and preparing for our next round of postdocs here at UCSD, whether they start virtually or in person, depending on when they're going to come and join us. Research compliance and integrity is open and fully operational, busy as ever. In all cases, there is this single site, research@ucsd.edu, that can get you access to each and every one of these areas, and we'll be directing you as quickly as possible to individuals that you might need to speak to when you have a question. So with that, we've used about half of our time, and we thought we would open this up next for questions. You can use the Q&A button on the bottom of the webinar screen to pose your questions. And we've got a couple of people who are screening those and organizing those questions. And they don't have to be to me, they can be to any of the experts or leaders that we have on the webinar today, available to answer your questions. And so with that, I think we've got some priority questions. Is that right?
Yes, so we can get started. These first few questions are related to the consequences to the current circumstances due to COVID-19 on grant funding. So the first question, it's actually a few related questions.
Okay.
About research assistants who cannot do the job they were hired for until data collection resumes. Does the period of paid leave for these people extend past the 128-hour period originally announced? Noting the funder has not offered the option of covering the cost of their administrative leave compensation through supplements, will the university cover that cost?
So I'll start with this, and Elizabeth, if you'd like to chime in, EVC Simmons, you can chime in as well. The administrative leave is leave that people can use for any purpose that relates to COVID-19. And it does apply to our research personnel, all employees at UC San Diego. This leave applies to individuals regardless of the nature of their responsibilities and whether they are currently busy 40 hours a week or a very limited number of hours. Elizabeth, would you like to add anything to that? And if you would, you are on mute.
Well, what I was going to say wasn't going to be terribly helpful anyway. All we know is what is in the written documents we've been given. We are waiting to see whether OP will give some further guidance that is intelligible. So far, unfortunately, the FAQs are sometimes a little contradictory.
Yes.
You know that we have pointed this out to OP and are endeavoring to get clearer guidance. So I'm not sure it was worth my coming off mute to say that, but thank you, Sandy, for reminding me to do so.
Right. But I think the important thing to note is that employees in research contracts and grants are eligible for this, and that they can use this 16 days worth of leave for purposes that are COVID-19 related. Next question.
The next question is another personnel question. This one is about students, primarily graduate student researchers. Other universities are stating that students can complete research projects that had been started, but not initiate new projects. Is that our policy, or is it really determined case by case?
Well, first, I'll start this and then I'll turn it over to Judy Kim from the graduate division. But it is our policy that students can complete projects that they have already engaged in if they're near the end of that project, or they would be able to complete it in a relatively short period of time. That said, that can only be done if they can be fully in compliance with our safety requirements in the laboratories or in the settings in which they work. So that is absolutely true. They can do that, but it is also absolutely the case that they need to be fully in compliance with our health-related contingencies. Judy, what would you like to add to that?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Judy Kim. I'm the Associate Dean at Graduate Division, and I don't have a whole lot to add except to state that if you are worried about the progress of your graduate student, in particular their progress towards their degree, we, as well as a grad council, are right now considering sort of hopefully extensions of time limits. We don't have an outcome yet. However, we are very cognizant and sensitive to the needs to potentially extend time limits. And so we will be taking all of that into consideration. In particular, if you have students who are facing time limits this spring, as well as fall, for any reason, we will be certainly very flexible given the circumstances.
Thank you, Judy. Okay, Megan, next question.
So to follow up with that, can time be donated?
You're talking about employee time be donated? Is that what the question was? We do have employee time donation policies through HR that would be in effect during this period of time. So I'm not quite sure what that question means, and we might want someone to elaborate on it so that we could later maybe offline go over details of that. Thanks,
okay.
Megan.
And to clarify the earlier question about administrative leave, can research staff who have exhausted their admin leave be laid off prior to June 30th?
Staff are not to be laid off before June 30th. And it is the responsibility of the PIs to manage that. If there are questions, I would suggest that those be directed to our HR here on campus. But the UC policy is that we will maintain employees through June 30th, that people are not to be laid off for COVID-19 reasons. So I hope that addresses the question.
Okay.
Next.
And then next question. If graduate students are supported throughout summer from research grants, will they receive funding even if they are unable to perform research during that time?
Well, research, we understand the activity of research to be quite broad. And as we've stated in a number of the announcements that the academic vice chancellors and I have sent out, we expect PIs to be flexible in their assignment of responsibilities, that people may be asked to be engaged, to engage in other kinds of activities other than what they were originally expecting. And you just heard from the graduate division that there is an emphasis on flexibility to help and assist our graduate students so that they can in fact complete their projects and complete their degrees in a timely fashion, even if they aren't exactly on time.
Okay, thank you. Next question is about recharge facilities. A question about helping recharge facilities currently with no income and ongoing operating expenses. What steps can be taken to ensure recharge facilities will be solvent and ready to return to operation? Two ideas suggested are A, policy allowing core users to use prepay for future use, and B, interim support from the university.
Those are great suggestions, and I would have said that if there is ongoing funding and there is an opportunity to be flexible about the timing for those charges, we can do that. So we can have that, afford that flexibility. I doubt that it would need to have a policy, but rather an emergency procedure approach to that. I think that's absolutely correct. For faculty who are, for researchers who have a laboratory that provides recharge services that is challenged by this immediate circumstance, which really labs recharge programs are all across the country. I've been in 3 conversations about this just within the last 2 days. I think first and foremost, it's going to be important for you to discuss this situation with your department chair and your dean to determine whether there is a reasonable course of action that could be taken. Do we have set aside funds for this at this time? The answer is no. We are all in this challenging situation together, however, and we will make every effort to help these important programs sustain over the long haul. But it might vary how that's managed on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, thank you. We have 2 questions for Kip now. The first one is, would Kip be able to give guidance now or in written guidance tomorrow on what the IRB considers to be, quote, safety visits that need timely reporting for interventional trials? There could be widely different interpretations of this.
Yeah, and I've answered this in writing, but the fact that there are varied interpretations means that we're not going to be able to provide one single answer to that. The best advice I can give is to refer to the routine IRB guidelines, so nothing COVID-specific, routine IRB guidelines about what deviations or unanticipated problems to report. And then also just to remind you all that there may be additional reporting obligations that are part of a protocol to report things to a sponsor or to the FDA that do not need to be reported to the IRB.
Thank you, Kip. I know we also have Gary Firestein on. Gary, anything else that you want to add to that?
No, I mean, I think if you look at the protocols, and it's usually pretty clearly stated out what is for safety, what is for monitoring, and what is for intervention. Anything that can be done in terms of monitoring remotely should be done remotely. But if somebody needs to come in for a blood draw for safety purposes, obviously that needs to be done face to face.
Okay,
Very
thank
good.
you.
And the particular requirements for those types of safety requirements for those types of visits are well articulated. Good. Megan, next question.
Okay, one more question for Kip. Is there any kind of timeline for when clinical trials will be able to enroll new patients? Is this different if it is a pediatric trial?
Okay, so Kip or Gary, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, probably I'll do it. This is Gary. So the guidelines and the guidance that was provided a little bit earlier by Kip address some of that. For most clinical trials with therapeutic intent, new enrollment is still allowed. The caveat is that it's defined as for serious or life-threatening diseases. And the definition of what is serious is obviously in the eye of the beholder. I've been adjudicating quite a few of those, but examples of non-serious would be lifestyle types of clinical trials or interventions, as opposed to a major medical illness using a biologic. So this is true not only for adults, but also for vulnerable populations, including the pediatric population. We view clinical trials as being part of our patients' medical care. It is one of the ways that we provide novel, cutting-edge healthcare to our patient population. And we are doing everything we can to avoid interfering with someone's healthcare.
Thank you, Gary.
Great, thank you.
Your efforts are much appreciated. Megan?
Thank you. So we're going to, let's see. So this question is about personnel. Is there any policy for research staff that works in clinics? Would they be able to join in on a telehealth visit? Are they even allowed into medical offices at this time?
Yeah, hi, I'm at the very beginning of that. I'm sorry. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, sorry, I was just muted. Is there any policy for research staff that work in clinics? Would they be able to join in on a telehealth visit? And are they even allowed into medical offices at this time?
Yes, because clinical trials are considered part of healthcare, the guidelines for managing those for staff is similar to how we manage staff and the doctors for part of their standard of care health visits. So the Cancer Center is basically working very similar to its to its previous operations, including well, actually with very little decrease in the number of people that are participating. And although some of the visits are going to be remote, the staff is still coming in, providing infusions and so on. The ACTRI clinic has actually considerably less business than it did before, so it is being consolidated into being open. I think right now it's going to be 3 days per week with fewer staff, but those staff are going to be available on site. It is also possible, just like with other types of clinical visits, that either staff or the physicians can work remotely. The ACTRI is setting up a Zoom account that can be used if people have difficulty or trouble setting it up themselves. These are a little bit different from Epic video visits because many of them are not billable or going through Epic, and we would just have to help work through the details of that on a protocol by protocol basis.
Thank you, Gary. That's very useful.
Okay, we have another personnel question. So for lab research staff who are only working minimal hours at home and in the lab, should they take leave or vacation for hours less than the 40 hours per week they are not working?
Well, so I'm going to answer this in two parts. And the first is that first and foremost, you want your lab staff to be doing as much as they can to facilitate your program of research. So even if you are assigning them very different types of tasks than what they would be doing if they were coming into the lab, those hours should be considered part of their daily work. For individuals who choose to or want to use their this additional administrative leave that comes at the direction of UC for these 16 days, that administrative leave by choice can be exercised in advance of other types of leave. Individuals at this point should not be forced to take sick time, should not be forced to take vacation time, because if they are funded on federal grants, because it is currently our understanding that their time, even if they aren't working full time, can be charged to grants if it is permissible and in alignment with the policy of their institution. And that is the policy of our institution. Okay.
Okay,
Next
thank
question.
you. Sorry, I was just plugging in my computer. Coming right back. Okay.
Well, Megan's getting the next question ready. I will mention that if we do not get through all the questions today, we're going to be monitoring them closely. And next Wednesday, we're going to have a second research town hall. We will be sure that we cover those questions and anything that's pressing. We can also put that information up on our website in the frequently asked questions section of the Blink website for research.
Great, thank you. So this is a follow-up to the last question. I would assume that the federal government may have to redirect funds. At what point might they reduce NIH funding, having a direct effect on the studies we are doing here in San Diego, possibly reducing the workforce or possibly furlough?
Really wonderful question. So I'm going to flip that around a bit. What we are advocating for, and I think what you heard from Angela Phillips Diaz, is that the research funding is not necessarily diminishing. It's not truncating. The support that you heard about for research and for other activities is above and beyond what the current budget is for those institutions. And the round 3.5 or 4 and or phase 3.5 or 4 and phase 5 funding is really designed to, in part, focus on additional educational needs, additional healthcare needs, and additional research needs. I'd like to reinforce the notion that we are working with professional organizations, national professional organizations, national academic and research organizations like the AAU and APLU, in advocating for substantial increments in agency funding for research. And frankly, the recent funding for the small business programs sets a great precedent for us, because there are ready ways to expand and support the research, the needs for those small businesses that were impacted by COVID-19. And it is that model that we're using in advocating for substantially larger amounts of funding for research purposes.
Thank you. This next question is more of a general funding question. is it expected that new non-COVID related grants will have a lower chance of being funded because of costs of supplements to existing grants and emphasis on COVID related new grants?
Really good question, and it's quite complicated because it varies tremendously, not just by agency, but actually by division within the agency. So let me give you an example. For the $945 million that was given to NIH, the bulk of that went to two institutions within NIH, NIAID and NHLBI, for drug development, drug discovery, vaccine development, etc. That was all surplus. That's a huge bolus of money. Other institutions may have received some funding, but the supplements for grants, their current grants would come out of their current standard budgets. Hence the importance of new monies to come into the institutions to fund not just COVID-related research, but to fund the current grants, which would probably be prioritized, and new grants. I know in discussions with leadership from a number of these institutions that there is a deep appreciation for the impact on students in training, undergrads and grads and postdocs, as well as junior investigators in this process, to not disrupt the development of our research pipeline. And the research is really considered, I think, a precursor to our small businesses. We are where the innovation comes from that then leads to those commercialization opportunities. And so it's that framework that's being used. I don't have a crystal ball. I'd be happy to hear from Angela. I don't know as if she has a crystal ball either, but we are trying to maintain priorities that we think are in the best interest of UC San Diego. Angela, would you like to add anything to that?
No, I think it's just to amplify your point that the agencies have made it clear that they are staying as close, on course in terms of their what we call their normal solicitations. And I mean, every week we receive new calls for proposals from the various agencies. And so these initiatives that are tied to the stimulus packages that I referenced, and as you said, are going to be, subsequent ones, whether it's 4, 5, 6, no one knows at this point. That is intended to be above and beyond, very targeted to address specific needs, whether it be for the institutions, for the students, for health, or for research. And so I think I guess my message is to encourage people to stay the course, and if they do have ideas or interest relative to COVID specific or aligned research, encourage people to pursue that, but don't feel that their work isn't relevant if it's not directly affiliated with COVID. I fully expect areas like social science and others will be critical as we are going forward, not only in this particular pandemic, but as other entities start to look forward, as you mentioned, relative to positioning ourselves so that we're not reactive, but are positioned to be able to address these issues in a thoughtful, data-driven response. Thanks.
So yeah, I'd just like to point out that this is a biological problem that's been substantially mitigated by behavioral strategies. That is, that it's through this distancing procedures, the limited interpersonal exposure, the practical behavioral activities of each one of us has made a difference. As Chip was referring earlier on, Dr. Schooley, to not being so much a peak in San Diego as a plateau. And so behavioral and social science research and understanding how to promote and sustain that is really critical to the economic impact and the mortality rates of individuals in these situations. So we're making those arguments boldly and persistently. That said, I want to emphasize what Angela was saying. All researchers should be using this time to write the grants that you're interested in. There is no indication that there's any decrease in any area of funding as a direct result of COVID-19. What we're trying to do is get augmentations rather than have this cut deeply into the research budgets. So
this is Angela, if I may. I think the other thing that we've seen in past experiences, usually it's because the budgets aren't released early enough in the cycle. This adds a different dimension, but to your point, to encourage our researchers to reach out to their program officers. If you have ideas of ways to supplement existing grants or contracts, you should pitch it to them, because with the work at home, I mean, there's so many dynamics in terms of impacts that the agencies will they need to obligate the funding, the fiscal year 20 funding that we're in right now. And so again, it's taking advantage of the opportunity that presents itself and helping those program officers to be able to manage their portfolios in a responsible way. Thanks.
Yeah, so just to make that very concrete, if you have ideas as to how you'd like to augment your grant through a supplement or rapid response opportunity or NOCI, please contact your officers ASAP. Normally, decisions are made and the agencies like to have their budget plans wrapped up by August. So we have a few months. Get your best ideas out there, contact your program officers, get those white papers and one-pagers into them to articulate what you'd like to do, because there will be opportunities and the agencies will want to spend their appropriated funds no later than, have them expended no later than September. So we have a few months, and I encourage you all to do that. With regard to the COVID applications, I just want to compliment our researchers. We already have over 20 grants that have been funded that are COVID specific since these additional funding popped up, and I think we have more than another 20 in process right now. So you guys are taking advantage of the opportunity. I encourage you to continue to do that. But we're also saying it's not just COVID specific. Please take the opportunity if you are at home and have extra time. Some of us don't, but if you do, please get those ideas into your project officers. Next question, Megan.
Next question is for either Angela or Kip. Any FDA outlook on the Hill in terms of how they are assumably handling the FDA EUA influx in any universities successfully navigating that process, though we are not FDA registered med dev companies and carry no quote unquote labels. There is a gap that exists for our emergent research responses in some cases. Any other observations or suggestions related to helping the cause?
Gary, Kip, Angela, any response to this?
Yeah, this is Kip. I've provided a written response here, but just for the group at large. The FDA, from what I've seen, has been very responsive to a lot of inquiries on a lot of fronts, and then including to universities. And then at the UC-wide level, Hilary Calais in the UC Office of General Counsel is very well versed with EUAs, which, just for everyone, is emergency use authorizations, which is sort of speeding development of drugs and diagnostics. And Hilary has been helping many people system-wide and helping to coordinate some of these responses. She's familiar with the laws and the regulations and other guidance that's out there. I don't know if the link is visible to everyone, but I did post a link to Hilary's contact information on the OGC website.
Wonderful, and we'll make sure this gets mentioned in the Q&A section on the research portal as well. Thank you, Kip.
This is Gary. There's one other thing I wanted to add to that. We're getting contacted, not daily, but close to that, by different investigators or clinicians who have very good ideas about a whole host of therapeutics. The one that is the most notable currently is plasma infusions from convalescent serum or convalescent blood. And I just wanted to remind people that to propose those sorts of things, it's very important to think carefully about the study design, whether samples, the reagents will be collected and managed under GLP conditions, good laboratory practices, whether the processing goes on under GMP conditions. Because what you can't do, what you cannot do is in your lab or in your clinic, draw and process some blood samples and then infuse it to patients. And you would be surprised at the number of requests that we've had to do that over the course of the last couple of weeks. There are some fantastic protocols, including one centered from Hopkins, and there are a couple of others that are working their way through the FDA right now. I expect that they will be launched relatively soon. These are very high priority studies for either healthcare workers or people at high risk or people with early infections in particular. And just be assured that this is very high on the list of priorities for the agency right now.
I think that's wonderful. And this is the kind of issue that using the SCREAM network might be particularly helpful for, because there are individuals who are engaged in activities in the ACTRI and the Morris Cancer Center, et cetera, who are a core part of that and very familiar with these requirements for launching clinical studies of this type and clinical trials. Excellent. Thank you, Gary.
Okay, next question is regarding stimulus. This might be for Angela or Caitlin. So concerning the UC leave obligations under FFCRA, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which includes additional 80 hours of sick time, are research coordinators seeing patients consider healthcare workers?
Yeah, this is Caitlin. I think that's actually more of an HR question, to be honest.
This is Angela. I agree. I mean, we can find the answer for you through HR, unless anyone on the group knows. But I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay.
It's a great question, and we'll be sure that we get it on up on the website. Now, I noticed that we have just a couple more minutes, and so I'm not sure we're going to be able to get to any more questions before we have to close for today. I will ask those on the phone. We'll be tracking the remaining questions and providing answers to those either through our frequently asked questions on the Blink website or through this system again next week on Wednesday when we meet. If you have additional questions, please get them to us so that we can maybe launch with those questions in the Q&A period next week. The additional request that I have for everyone on the line is if there are general topics that you would like us to discuss above and beyond the ones that we presented today, please let us know so that we can make sure that we are covering the things that are of most interest and most importance to you. And again, with as you heard at the beginning of this hour and a half, we are very appreciative of all of the efforts that you are individually making, that you're making as researchers, and that you're making as part of our UC San Diego team. We are in this together, and I'm so glad that we've been able to create such a low plateau so far for UC San Diego, for our staff and for our students. Let's keep that up, and I will look forward to talking with you all again next week. Thank you.